All right, well, the bells are done, so we'll get going. Thank you everyone for being here. This is our first WildXChange of 2021, and we're really grateful that we get this opportunity every Friday to have an hour and a half of conversation with our peers across campus and beyond in our community, to share on topics that are maybe new, maybe familiar, but definitely worth investigating and understanding. And so we're grateful to have this space every week, and we invite you to join us every week. This week, we're really lucky to have Joey Grafton joining us from Pacific University. Joey is a runner over there and is going to talk a little bit more about his experience as a transgender athlete, some of the challenges, some of the surprising elements that people may not be aware of or haven't considered. We also have Kenna Tanouye, who is, she was an intern for us last semester in athletics, an RA, and just all around go-getter. She's done a bunch of research in this area and is going to share what she has learned as well. And then last but not least, we have Zack Robie, the president of Linfield University Pride. Zack, we're really happy to have you here too. And I love that Zack has been more and more involved in our WildXChanges, and it's just great to have their voice in this every time. So thank you all for what you're about to present. Our general structure here is that we are recording this, so if anybody wants to hear it later, they can. These three will give a presentation, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. So make sure you're writing down whatever questions that you have. You're welcome to put those in the chat or raise your hand and ask those questions, or you can also send them directly to any of us individually so that we can put the question out there to the group for you on your behalf. So with that, we'll get going. Anyone else from the WildX team want to say anything?
Just thanks for everybody for joining us. We're really excited to get the 2021 year off to an awesome start.
Nice.
Yeah, I could deal with that. We're excited to get rolling. Great topic today. Welcome everyone. And we got a great month ahead of us as well. Look forward to it.
Great. All right, Joey, Kenna, and Zack, take it away.
I think it's me starting us off. Okay, let's go. Let's see. I can share my screen. Everybody can see it and hear me okay? Okay. Cool. Okay, so like Jane had mentioned, this has been a topic that I actually started a year ago under a different internship back home in Hawaii under the supervision of the Hawaii High School Athletic Association. I was under the supervision of Christopher Chun, Natalie Iwamoto, and Rosalie Aoki. And so at the time, they just needed more information on transgender athlete participation, specifically within high school athletics, just because that was something applicable for the organization. So that's at least where it started for me. And yeah, and I've updated this presentation with more information and feedback from Joey, Zack, and Jane on what would be more helpful for everyone who may be approaching this topic for the first time. Okay. Let's see if I can, there we go. Okay, also an important note, this is not an exhaustive list. It's merely a starting point, and by all means, should I not be your do-all, end-all source of information on anything, this is just merely to help give guidance. And yeah, basic overview. There's a lot that I'll be covering, so I'll try and go as quickly as possible and try not necessarily to stop throughout all of it, just so we can at least get it presented and then move on to more important things afterwards, like Q&A. Okay, so basically breaking down the issue, what is it? The participation of transgender individuals in competitive sports, regulations and policies, and there being a lopsided focus. Okay, I'm trying to like navigate the box of videos of everyone's faces around the content on the screen. Okay, broken up into the three parts with participation of transgender individuals in competitive sports. It can be looked at from the youth level, high school, collegiate, and professional level. Regarding regulation and policies, some questions and thoughts are, should transgender athletes be required to have hormone therapy? Should it be on the basis of gender identity or gender assigned at birth? And how does this topic relate to Title IX? In regards to a lopsided focus, there is a very much lopsided focus on transgender women versus transgender men. What is the real issue at hand? And is this only a problem once transgender athletes start winning? Okay, these are just kind of like self-reflective questions for you all, but beginning thoughts. What do you know about transgender individuals or Title IX? How much research have you done on this topic? And do you have any personal experiences you can refer to? There are multiple valid perspectives for any of these questions, but also keep in mind to self-check what your own biases are. Okay, a little bit more about me, my perspective before researching this topic. So my name's Kenna, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a cisgender woman. I'll get into terminology and fancy words later on. But my upbringing, I was super fortunate enough to grow up in a household that is accepting and open-minded with issues like this. So I approach it with a sense of empathy and understanding. Personally, I view it as someone who feels so strongly and passionate about their self-identity, not aligning with their gender assigned at birth, not them trying to find some sort of competitive advantage in sport. And a huge important point is this is not just a transgender person's issue. We live in a society that's far more expansive and complex to have only two options for someone's gender identity. And honestly, that would be kind of boring if I only had two options in life. And the burden of equality should not be solely on the shoulders of the marginalized. This isn't the responsibility of trans individuals explaining this to everybody and trying to force it down people's throats. You need to find the importance of it within yourself as well, because progress won't be able to occur. And again, looping it back to sport, would the motivation of the individual be really to go through all of these huge processes with their bodies and their lives just to win, for say, a track and field meet? Okay, let's see. Okay, so some important terminology, things that I'll be referencing throughout this presentation and I imagine will be brought up in conversation afterwards. The term cisgender describes a person who does identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Dead name is the use of the birth or other former name of a transgender or non-binary person without their consent. Intentional dead naming is sometimes used to aggressively dismiss and reject a person's gender identity and the name that accompanies it, which may for some be incredibly disrespectful. Gender assigned at birth, the gender a person was assigned at birth. Currently, it's being used as used to enforce the concept of the gender binary, explicitly only using male or female. With gender, it's the complex relationship between physical traits and one's internal sense of self, as male, female, both, or neither, as well as one's outward presentations and behaviors related to that perception. Okay, gender binary, a concept or belief that there are only two genders and that one's biological or birth gender will align with traditional social constructs in masculine and feminine identity, expression, and sexuality. Gender identity, a person's internal sense of one's own gender. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same, and sometimes the two tend to get lumped together or confused for one or the other. In regards to gender expression, it refers to the ways in which people externally communicate their gender identity to others through behavior, clothing, haircut, voice, and other forms of presentation. All people have gender expression, not just transgender people. The term gender non-conforming relates to a person whose behavior or appearance does not conform to prevailing cultural and social expectations about what is appropriate to their gender. The term intersex is a general term used for a variety of situations in which a person is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the boxes of female or male. Sometimes doctors do surgeries on intersex babies and children to make their bodies fit the binary ideas of male or female. And a statistic about intersex people, at least in the United States, 1 to 2 in 100 people born in the US are intersex. Okay. The term non-binary describes a person who does not identify within the gender binary. There is no one way to be non-binary. For the term sex, usually it refers to the gender a person was assigned at birth, which is deduced by examining the external genitalia or, oh, that's supposed to say fetus, of a newborn. Other similar terms include birth sex or biological sex and, like, in air quotes, what you were born as. I advise, and other resources advise, using gender assigned at birth or assigned gender to refer to this, just to make it a little bit more easy to understand. The term transgender relates to a person whose gender identity differs from the gender the person was assigned as having at birth. This is not an adjective, or this is an adjective. It's not a noun or verb. Sometimes people add on ed to the end of transgender to refer to transgender individuals, and that's incorrect. In regards to transition and transitioning, any steps a person takes to affirm their gender identity. Transitioning does not mean changing gender, it's a way of affirming it. There is no singular way to transition. It's up to the person transitioning to define their transition for themselves. And transphobia is the fear and or hatred of transgender people. Transphobia is manifested in a number of ways, including violence, harassment, and discrimination. Okay. What is Title IX and how it refers to this particular instance? This is one of my favorite people ever, Congresswoman Patsy T. Mink, and this is the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity and Education Act, or Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. The official language in it states, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So within the concept of sports, athletic programs are considered educational programs and activities. Title IX does not require the reduction of opportunities for male athletes in order to increase opportunities for female athletes, which is a big misconception for some people. Within at least sports programs. And basically, the philosophical underpinning of Title IX is that there can't be an economic justification for discrimination. Compliance is assessed via a total program comparison, and just because sports are broken up as men and women's sports, it's not just one men's or one women's team in the same sport type of deal. And there's 3 parts to Title IX as it applies to athletic programs: effective accommodation, athletic financial assistance, and other program components. Okay. In regards to the next, I think it's around 3 slides, not exhaustive on the science end. I tried to just pull basic points about each of them to just give a general understanding. But for cisgender men, they tend to have denser, stronger bones, tendons, and ligaments, larger hearts, greater lung volume per body mass, a higher red blood cell count, and higher hemoglobin. And in regards to the next one, it's going to be about testosterone and estrogen. But testosterone increases your red blood cell count, theoretically increasing oxygen capacity and therefore stamina and or endurance, and increases the speed of muscle repair. A misconception about it is taking testosterone will simply create muscle on its own. You must exercise the muscles to build them. It's not just going to magically happen. I feel like that's with any type of sport or exercise. And you also can't compare one person to another and conclude or assume that the person with the higher level of testosterone will perform better. I feel like that's a huge aspect of sports that people love about it. It's unpredictable. Literally anything can happen. So that's something to keep in mind. In regards to estrogen, it helps with the development of breasts, wide hips, and fat distribution. Some common reports of taking estrogen included a decrease in body hair growth. Emotional changes vary from person to person. It's not going to be a uniform outcome. And some common hormone replacement therapy methods for estrogen include estrogen, testosterone blockers, and progesterone. There we go. Okay. And in regards to hormone replacement therapy, below are some common ways that people take estrogen that can be abbreviated to E, or take testosterone, which can be abbreviated to T. Basically, hormone replacement therapy helps with the gender affirmation process, and these hormones replace the hormones their body naturally produces. So it can be taken in the form of pills, much like birth control with estrogen, and some common forms include estradiol, and I'm really sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but testosterone is taken via topical gels, intramuscular, or subcutaneous shots or subdermal pellets. So there are a bunch of different ways that you can take both of these hormones. Okay, and now getting into some specific examples within sport. I don't know if anybody is aware or was aware of when this was initially brought up in, I believe, 2019, to track and field athletes, Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood. in Connecticut. They combined had a total of 15 women's state championship titles. 3 other Connecticut high school athletes challenged the state's policy of letting transgender athletes compete on sport teams based on their gender identity. And the official Title IX complaint, this is the language from it, males will always have inherent physical advantages over comparably talented and trained girls. That's the reason we have girls' sports in the first place, stating that because of Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood's participation in the Connecticut track and field sport, that it was preventing wins, state titles, and athletic opportunities for cisgender women. So that was the main bulk of at least what the complaint was. And as of March 2019, a lot of it has been changed, adjusted. It's still being debated within the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference policy. But this was their language that they had in the policy. Committed to providing transgender student athletes with equal opportunities to participate in CIAC athletic programs consistent with their gender identity. The organization that was representing the student athletes that were trying to go against Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood were being represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom organization. And their stated goal is of advocating, training, and funding on the issues of religious freedom, sanctity of life, and marriage and family. And background on their organization, they argued 9 cases before the Supreme Court and won all of them. Okay. This is Skylar Baylor. He competed collegiately in men's swimming. He was the first openly transgender NCAA D1 swimmer, the first publicly documented NCAA D1 transgender man to compete as a man in any sport. Originally, he was recruited by Harvard University and as on the women's team. But ultimately, he was that good that the men's team also offered him a scholarship as he was going through his transition, and he was officially recruited afterwards and allowed a spot. Essentially, he could end up choosing whichever team he wanted to go with. Some statistics about his career in 2019, his final 100-yard breaststroke time ranked him in the top 15% of all NCAA swims for the season, and in the top 34% of all NCAA D1 swims for that season. Okay. And this is Lindsay Haycox. I don't know if anybody heard about the Fairness in Women's Sport Act that was brought up by the state of Idaho House bill. This is the official language listed in that bill. There are inherent differences between biological men and women. After 12 months of hormonal therapy, a man identifies as a woman and is taking cross-sex hormones, had an absolute advantage over female athletes and will still likely have performance benefits over women. A recent study of biological female and biological male Olympic performance since 1983 found that although athletes from both sexes improved over the time span, the gender gap between biological female and biological male performances remained stable. Essentially, Lindsay wanted to participate, but due to a lot of the complications of this bill being proposed, that was a really big difficulty, and was essentially trying to create these new restrictions for the designation of athletic teams by biological sex, interscholastic, intercollegiate, intramural, and club sports that are sponsored by a public school or any school that is a member of the Idaho High School Activities Association, or a public institution of higher education, or any higher education institution that is a member of the NCAA, NAIA, or NJCAA would have to abide to this essentially. If disputed, students may establish sex by presenting a signed physician statement that shall indicate the student's sex based solely on internal and external reproductive anatomy, normal endogenously produced levels of testosterone, and analysis or an analysis of the student's genetic makeup. Okay. Again, with like a lot of these questions, we'll probably circle back to them towards the end with Q&A, but just to at least start thinking about it, don't necessarily have to answer it right now, but what is your stance on transgender athletes' participation in athletics on all levels? What do you think should be the policies set in place to determine someone's verified gender? For example, hormone therapy. What are your thoughts on some people's solution of having a third gender or other category for transgender athletes to compete within? Should allowing transgender athletes to participate in sport be a state or federal decision? What are your thoughts on the imbalance of focus on transgender athletes' participation? For example, transgender men versus transgender women. If you were on a team with a transgender individual, how would you approach the situation? And how does everyday life affect the perception of transgender individual participation in sports? Okay. So some solutions that people have tried to offer up in solution of transgender individual participation in sports have been third gender competition and or mixed gender competition. Some issues with third gender competition is this feeling of othering and basically invalidating the transition of someone's gender identity and everything that they've gone through. It ultimately defeats the purpose of sports of being inclusive and building community. In regards to mixed gender, that has varied across reception of people being interested in it and whether or not it would even work. It's essentially saying that anyone can participate, but it would vary by sport and structure of how it would operate and compete. Okay. Just some general things about what the purpose of sports is about. Core root of it, inclusivity, participation, community, and teamwork, and it being a reflection of our changing dynamic of people in our world. Let's see what else we got. And just the expansion of traditional definition. The definition of sex is broadening. Referencing back to the language of Title IX, it doesn't ever explicitly state male or female, it says sex. That's a very broad term, and to minimize it down to something so either or, I would argue against that. Sports reinforces the gender binary. We break it down between men's and women's sports. So that's a huge aspect of everything when you compete. Accounting for gender fluidity and non-binary individuals, how you would be able to adapt to that, how we could create solutions to include gender fluid and non-binary people. And it's a generational difference thing. I know for me, just a basic example, when I was doing this research and this presentation started it last summer, just bringing up some of these slides to my parents, like they've been aware of some of these topics just due to me and my older sister talking about it. But to the extent of like, at least for younger generations, this is something that's a little bit more normalized and something we're surrounded by a lot more with access to social media and content from around the world. For older people, as simple as just like my parents or friends of my parents, this is something completely foreign and it's going to take a long time to learn about it. But the important thing is that you at least put your best foot forward and try. Okay. And then just another, looping back to the term intersex athletes. A common misconception with Caster Semenya is a lot of people in the media misgender her and say that she's a transgender woman. She is not. She's an intersex individual. She identifies as a woman and was assigned a different sex at birth from what she currently identifies with now. Something in regards to specific terminology, differences of sex development, often referred to as DSD, can look like a bunch of different things. There's no uniform way. But the main issue at hand is regarding the scrutiny around her was society's definition, Western society's definition of what characteristics make up a woman, and Caster Semenya didn't fall in that category. But also it was another issue of, would this have been something as controversial as it has been if she wasn't such a great athlete? Like the fact that she was winning all of these competitions, was that the only reason why people were upset about it? And a good quote about this from Katrina Kargazis from a Hulu documentary. I can't think of the exact name of the Hulu documentary, but she stated, the problem is with people trying to use a single biological criterion to place people in one category or the other. Again, labels and trying to confine people down to just one or two things is problematic. And then also the term gender as a spectrum. Have you heard of this phrase? How do you feel about it? Do you have any solutions as to how sports could include individuals whose gender does not fall neatly into the traditional gender binary? And then to wrap it up, application of it with policy and requirements. Currently, there are 3 different stances on trans inclusive laws in the United States, there's either a fully conservative lens, an inclusive lens, or there's no policy in place. Currently it's up to the state. It's not a federal issue, but as the level of play increases, sports do become more of a business and there's a lot more money involved within the process. And so that's also something to keep in mind. This bottom part was a little bit more applicable to my internship last year, but I mean, it's still important now. High school athletics, if you were to say, for example, require certain procedures or hormone therapy for high school student athletes, it would break up the ability to participate and shift it to more of a socioeconomic ability. And it wouldn't be a matter of like, are you good enough to make the team? It's like, do you have enough money to be able to even participate? So that's something to keep in mind. And then application to Linfield. There's not enough information to outright assume that our student athlete population on campus are all cisgender individuals. Whether or not those who identify as transgender, non-conforming, non-binary, or other identities, they may not feel comfortable or safe enough to talk about these issues with their coaches, teammates, or athletic administration. So ultimately it's up to us to create and enforce a culture that's inclusive and knowledgeable on these issues within the world of sports and outside of the world of sports, because there's life after 4 years of college, and a lot of important lessons can be learned through sports. And so, yeah, I think that's a lot. Sorry, that was a lot. But great segue to at least build a general understanding of it before we get further on into the conversation. But yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself now. I just realized I was still.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kenna, for your presentation. It was outstanding and I very much appreciate it. So now I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. I'll start off with my little personal journey and then a little some tips for coaches to how to be inclusive to your trans athletes and create an environment where your athletes feel comfortable coming out to you. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, and Q&A can apply to Kenna's presentation, to me and my story, to my tips, or anything else that you have questions about trans athletes. I'm sure we can pull it together and figure out a good answer. So yeah, hi, my name is Joey Grafton. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a sophomore at Pacific University. I run cross country and I'm on the track and field team at Pacific. So going way back, I've been playing sports ever since I can remember. I started soccer when I was like 4 years old, and ever since I've never like stopped being an athlete, which I'm so thankful I've gotten to do, because it's just like been one of the best things in my life. And so, you know, about by the age of like 6, I became at least a 2-sport athlete, and basically year round competed. I started cross country and track when I started track in middle school and started cross country in high school. And I've continued it thankfully into college. As for, I am trans, I'm a trans man. And I don't think I realized I was trans until about 8th grade. And at that point, didn't really do much about it. I told my friends, I came out to my friends and was like, hey, I'm trans, I'm gonna use he, him pronouns and the name Joey. And everybody was super cool with it. I'm so grateful. But I like kind of came out to my mom, but not really. And so when it came to playing sports, I definitely didn't come out to my coaches at that point, because very little people knew. I didn't have that relationship with my coaches at that point. When I started coming out at school, it was about the second semester of my freshman year of high school. And when it came to my sophomore season, I went up to I do distance and track, so cross country track is basically the same coach. I went up to my cross country coach and I was like, hey, like, I'm going to be going by the name Joey and using he, him pronouns, but I want to continue to run on the girls team because that's where all my friends are. And she was like, okay, yep, sure. Like, are you going to start taking hormones or surgery or anything like that? I was like, nope, just run on the girls team, having a good time. And thankfully in my school district, if I would have wanted to, I could have ran on the boys team. We had a policy where you did not have to take any hormones or have any surgeries to run on any team. As long as your gender identity matches the team you wanted to participate on, you can participate. So throughout high school, I ran with the girls team. And then when it came to looking for colleges, I was recruited for the girls team for my school, for Pacific. And after my first semester there, I was like, hey, I had been putting off taking testosterone because I wanted to continue to compete on the girls team, just simply because, like I said, in high school, that's where my friends were. But after coming to Pacific and participating in the cross country season, I was like, hey, I think I want to compete on the guys team, even though that would mean I had to run the 8K. And so I went up to my coach, I emailed her and I was like, hey, well, first I met with our Title IX coordinator and I was like, is there gonna be any issue with me taking testosterone? She goes, nope, I've never had anybody do this, but I'm sure we can figure it out. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I looked up, like the NCAA policy on it, and basically the NCAA policy is as soon as you start taking testosterone, you have to compete for the guys team. And so I was like, okay, went to my coach with that information. I was like, hey, can we talk? And sat her down and was like, hey, I'm trans, use he, him pronouns. Not that she didn't know I use he, him pronouns, because I already told everybody on my team. I was like, hey, use he, him pronouns, no issue. I've just always been a guy running on the girls team for a long time. And she's like, okay, yeah, do you want to run on the guys team then? I was like, yep. And she's like, okay, cool. I don't know where to start or who to talk to. And I was like, well, I talked to our Title IX coordinator, so I think she'd be a good person to start out with. I made a collection of documents that talked about the NCAA policy, and I was like, you can go to these. And she's like, okay, cool. Like, do you have any concerns? I was like, well, of course I'm concerned about running the 8K. To go from a 6K to an 8K is kind of a long distance jump. And then I was like, besides that, I don't really think so. And she's like, okay, cool. Like, if anybody on the team is ever disrespectful or anything like that, come to me, because like that's bad sportsmanship and that's not being a good teammate, and I won't tolerate that. And just like her saying that, but it was really important to me. And so sure enough, went and talked to our head coach of the track team, and he was like, cool, easy enough. Not really my place to do anything because your other coach will take care of it. And I was like, cool. And then in July of this year, I started taking testosterone. And so I've been on it for about 6 months, and I started running for the guys team. I haven't really had a season to compete in, but yeah, it's been pretty good. I'm very happy that I chose to start taking testosterone, even if that meant that I couldn't run on the girls team with most of my friends. I made me a lot happier in my everyday life, and I am making friends on the guys team. And so we're getting there. I wish we could see each other more often. So yeah, that's about where we're at this point, where I'm at this point. If I were to say some tips for coaches to create a trans inclusive space, or to possibly what to say if one of your athletes does come out as trans, one is just to be really accepting, because it takes a lot of courage to like talk to someone who you idolize or look up to say, like, to be so vulnerable with them. And so just like the student getting there could be sometimes the hardest part. After that, it's like, make sure that your team, if a student does come out as trans, make sure that you can help them in any way you can. Title IX coordinator is a great person to talk to. There's a little bit of paperwork involved, either way. So you fortunately got to work on that. Create a space where you feel like your athletes can talk to you. If your athletes have anything that, they think that they want to tell you or that they need to tell you, just creating a space where they feel comfortable doing so can be so important. And when it comes to all like trans people, it is important to like, be respectful of pronouns and names, and like, it's okay to slip up when you're first like, figuring it out, but, try your hardest. Don't make a big deal of it when you do slip up, and, make sure that you correct others on the team if they slip up as well. Like, hey, just a reminder, this is the new name and pronouns, just to make sure. And just those little like things of, reinforcing a person's identity can be so impactful to the athlete. So yeah, that is about it. So I think we are now open to Q&A. So yes, you can unmute yourself, ask any questions, or drop them in the chat. Either way, or send it to us individually as well. So
Thank you, Joey. A question maybe before we get to other questions too is, Zack, do you want to share anything about your relationship with this topic, or should we move to Q&A?
I personally don't have much relationship with the topic other than my relationship with the athlete. Besides being the partner of someone who is a transgender athlete, I'm not a transgender athlete, so really all of my views are just on my personal experiences as a non-binary person. So if anyone has any non-binary specific questions, I'm happy to do my best to answer them. And then maybe for the sports side of that, Joey can chime in and help me, but I don't have much in terms of sports. So if we ever do anything about like music or theater, then I'm your person, but
Cool, thank you.
Hey, Joey. My name is Keaton. And I guess one of my first questions would be, what are some things that have made you feel like most included when you switched to running on the guys team? Like things they've done, things that coaches have done to kind of make that switch easier?
Yeah, I think number one was like we have team captains. So my coach was like, hey, get in contact with our team captain. And so just him, and I know that our team captain, I'm so thankful, he goes out of our way to make sure that I feel included in anything that occurs. And so having him like lead and role model that has been really important. And he's also just like a super nice guy. And so I've been really thankful to, have that, have him be there for this. But also just like the guys, I think we have a really combined team already with the girls and guys team. And so it wasn't too hard because we already have combined practices just to like, okay, like if we're splitting up between, girls and guys, it's just gotta go to the other groups, no big deal. So I think that has been really important. And I think that another one is, as I've been taking testosterone, I've been slowly gaining speed. And so when I first started, it's like I'm running on the guys team, but I'm nowhere nearly as fast as a lot of the guys. But I think that wasn't an issue at all, that a lot of guys were like, hey, like, it doesn't matter. You're just like any other guy on the team. Like, even if you're a little bit slower than us right now, like, I'm sure you'll be kicking my ass in just a few months, So I think that's been really important, and just being like included in team, like traditions and team culture.
Can I ask something kind of related to that? Like, how do you feel about people on the team or your coaches or other people like commenting on if they're when they're seeing changes, like your speed increasing, those kinds of things? How do you feel about people commenting on that?
Yeah, I think there's, good ways and bad ways to do that. It's always nice when a team, whenever you're making improvements anyways, it's always nice to receive compliments for that. Like, oh, like, I can't believe you just like, beat your personal record or anything like that. Like, that's super important when people keep track of that thing. It really is important and meaningful. I think the other part of me is like, I want people to acknowledge them, but not in a way where I feel like I'm kind of like in a science experiment, and so I think that's important. But I think most people are really respectful for those type of things. Some people are like, oh, wow, like I haven't seen you in a while, especially with people like not being on campus for a while and then coming back to campus. I was like, wow, your voice is so much deeper. Like, I can't believe it. And stuff like that. It's like, it's kind of sweet. It's like they're trying to acknowledge that, like, it shows that they care about me in a bit. And I know like some people on my team, like there's one girl who she is so invested in my transition, I think more than I am. And sometimes it's like, okay, you can calm down, but most of the time it's very sweet. And like, even last year when I was still running on the girls team, but, she was like, oh, I really like your shirt today. Like, it's really cute. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, can I call you cute? Like, is that an issue? And I was like, no, like, you can totally call me cute. Like, it doesn't matter. But I thought like it was really sweet that she thought so much about it, that she would consider just the words that she uses around me. And so I thought like things like that show that you care as well.
Thank you.
Hi, Joey. It's Kalia. We met. I just wanted, if you wanted to share more about Pacific having the gender neutral locker room and just like different things that Pacific does to be inclusive, just like out of curiosity from my stance as a professional inclusion, just thinking about ways that we can make Linfield more accessible.
Yeah, so recently at Pacific, we redid our locker room area, and that included the inclusion of a gender neutral locker room. When I first came out, it was definitely like, okay, well, where do you want to have your locker room be? And thankfully, you know, they're like, well, you can have your locker room be wherever you want it to be. It can still be in the girls' locker room. It can be in the coach's locker room. It can be in the boys' locker room. It can be just in the bathrooms. And I was like, well, I would like to be in the boys' locker room. But yeah, then they were like, okay, well, obviously there's an issue. There's something missing here where not only do you feel like you have to choose between this binary, lots of our gender non-conforming students, you know, if they don't have a space to use in our athletics facility. And so like, okay, well, let's create a gender neutral locker room. And so thankfully, I haven't seen it yet. I wish I could, but our athletic center is closed because of COVID. And so I'm really excited when that opens up, because that creates not only a space for like anybody who's on our athletics team, but anybody who uses our gym as well. They're going to have a space to go to where it's going to be inclusive to all people. So I'm really excited to see that. Other things that my school did to make me feel included, I think that I don't know how much paperwork that you have to do on, you know, the more coaches side, administration side. But the only thing that I really had to do, they worked really well with me, is I had to get paperwork saying that the testosterone that I was taking was prescribed by my doctor. And that was super easy. They sent me the paperwork that I needed to send to my doctor, send it to my doctor got it back to me, and I sent it back to them, and that was it. And so it was just super simple. It was no worry for me. It was basically just me being the liaison between me and my doctor and the athletics facility. So that was really cool. And I definitely think they make sure to try to use like my name everywhere that they can, and only put my like legal name on legal paperwork, only where it's like absolutely necessarily required. And so I think they definitely, a lot of people in our administration go out of their way to like try to make sure like, okay, where do we need to put names, what pronouns? You know, it's like if I ever have paperwork, because a lot of paperwork gets filled out for the NCAA. It's like, okay, there's medical paperwork that's very much heavily involved in this, and medical paperwork tends to be tied to legal paperwork. So it's like, okay, what name do I need to put on this? Stuff like that. And so they've been really understanding and like answering all my questions. So yeah.
That made me think about, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I haven't thought about with like this intersection, which is really exciting to like, thank you all for sharing. But if any of you could speak to, what are your thoughts on like record keeping? Like when we have, I swim, so I like, I always see the records on, there's like the men's and the women's record holders, and recognizing that if somebody like had those records, that there's a chance for those to be using like a dead name or something. So going back and changing a name, I don't know what that would look like, but that was just something, I don't know if anybody has ideas on that. Yeah.
I mean, purely from a spectator, I consider myself a retired athlete. I played basketball up until college, but I mean, in regards to like specifically like sectioning off records, like if it's on a wall or if it's in a book or something, I personally think you should just have all athletes within that respective sport listed as like whatever their records are, because honestly, there are some women that will kick some dudes' butts on like records. So it's like at that point, it's like who's the best in whatever sport, not necessarily split it up by gender. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
I think for me, I think we are heading towards a future where we have like non-gender divided sports, but we're not there yet. And so I think for right now, what a solution that easily would be, especially like when for swim, you know, you have a lot of times your name up on the board, that can just be like a simple name change. But at that point, like if you're still swimming, if there's a record that was set while you're swimming on the girls team, then, you know, it might still be able to put up there, but you should ask the athlete, because not all athletes would be comfortable with that. For me, I would be like, hey, that's when I swam on the girls team, and that was the record I held then. then just change my name on it, but keep the record up there. And then as I continue to swim on the boys team, if I set any records, I want it on the boys side. But like I said, that's not for all athletes. So I think it is more case by case basis. So.
Hi, Joey. I just have a really quick question. I was just curious if you have any friends or know of anybody, like athletes specifically, who have transitioned from competing with men to female, and how their experience went from them or for them from like transitioning from each side.
I unfortunately do not. And that definitely touches what your question touches on, a really good question, or like a really big issue, that like transitioning from female to male compared to male to female is like completely different ballparks in athletics. And I obviously, with me taking testosterone, like I said, it's as soon as I take testosterone, I have to be on the boys team for NCAA policy. And nobody gave me any flack for that, thankfully. But trans women, on the other hand, if you are transitioning through NCAA rules from male to female, and you start taking estrogen, you have to take estrogen for a full year before you can compete again. And so this divide and inequity in trans women and trans men. But yeah, it's just very crazy. Like there was a story of Lindsay, who we saw in the presentation. Her story very much mirrors mine. We're like same major, same age, same athlete, like same athletic sports. So sorry, same sports. And it's like, I had no issue with my transition, and she had to go to fight the state and, has to take a year off. And so it's crazy to like think of these parallels, how we're living such similar lives, but her athletic story has to be so different than mine. And so I'm so thankful that I've had such an easy way, but I know if I were a trans woman, that I would definitely have, so much more struggle. I'm sure there would be backlash. I think that, like I said earlier, like I think we're coming to a point where we're going to have no gender division between sports. And at that point, I hope trans women don't have to go through so much hassle and so much struggle. And that we can transition however we want without the worry of spectators and, so much politics being put into your transition.
Hi, this question is for everyone in the virtual room. We have a lot of athletes, both cisgender and trans athletes. We have coaches, we have former retired athletes, we have administrators, and kind of piggyback on what Joey was just saying, what barriers do we see for reducing or getting rid of the gender binary in sports, and what are some of the benefits and barriers to having mixed gender sports for the athletes and perhaps even for our society more generally?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. I think in some ways it's just taking everything that we know and turning it on its end a little bit. And I think that those kinds of changes conceptually and emotionally are challenging for people. And it's not something that we have put out there. Doug, you can comment on this, you've been here longer than I have, but I don't think that's a conversation we've broached with our alumni. That's huge. That would be huge, because once you graduate from a school and you have Linfield has got such a devoted alumni group, and they are very devoted to their experience they had here. And the further athletes get away from their college career, the more tender it is to them, and the experience that they had exactly the way they had it. And so I think to change the sports to make them binary or non-binary would be unbelievable. It would be incredible as far as like what it would open up, and how does that change any scholarships, and how does that, all kinds of stuff. There's so many ramifications. As far as a barrier here at Linfield at this point, I think it would just be conceptually, like just the whole idea of removing male and female sports. And I say that as a swimmer who swam I mean, we're men's and women's swimming is always together, but we compete separately. Our events are separately. But as far as the team dynamic, we felt like one team. So in that way, that wouldn't be challenging, I think, for some teams to transition to.
Yeah, I can add to that too. First of all, Kenna, great job on that presentation. Hear it and seeing it from you live was much better than me just reading it. And I appreciate your time, Joey, too. I've been involved in athletics for a long time, and I have kids as well. And for me as a coach, kids who participate, they're still all of our kids, regardless of whatever your identity or gender. They're all our kids, and athletics plays a big role in your development, more than just the competition. There's more to the development and your experience as an athlete than the competition itself. And I think those other parts involved in athletics will be with you for the rest of your life. A lot of times the wins and losses you don't remember, but it's all the little things you do that you remember for the rest of your life. That experience and the stories you tell and share are real critical for all our athletes. I mean, I get together with former athletes of mine, teammates, and we didn't even talk about games. We talk about all the silly things we've done, or the dumb things, or bad choices, or those memories. I think with the transition change, it's the old folks, people who are used to the old ways of doing things, the standardized ways of how we compete and how we do things. And a lot of the decisions that are made are above our heads, with the NCAA, and there's politics and the power dynamics. There's so much involved, and I can see where the change could evolve to, team sports versus individualized sports. If there was, I know for me, if we had just track and we're all the same, great. We have less coaches, in some ways. It's just we have a head coach and assistant coaches, and we're coaching all the kids because you're coaching and teaching the same way, no matter who you have in front of you. And we treat our kids the same way. We're trying to make them better people first, and then better athletes second. And if academics is important to you, that should be top number one, behind being a great person. So that's my perspective. The change is going to happen. How quickly, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And everyone's having conversations about the change. It has to continue. And I think that's real important.
Yeah, and Tanya, it makes me think of, I automatically went back to when I was in elementary school, middle school, and when that transition in education where you go to having PE classes and they split you up into the boys and the girls, and you have the girls go in the girls' locker room, the boys go in the boys' locker room, and it's completely separate. And so it's and of course everyone's going through puberty, and everything's going kind of haywire there. So I think it's a huge societal thing that with gender, and education and sports replicates that. And then at first I was like, well, baseball and softball are different sports, but I know guys that love to play softball too. And, I think that a lot of stuff we can keep the sports sure and just make it open to everyone, hopefully. But yeah.
Well, and I wondered too, I see to some degree societal changes allowing more flexibility where that can happen, but I also see sports potentially leading to some of that change. If they, and I don't know if it'd be more apt to happen at the high school level or the college level or professional level, but I think there is downward pressure that we've seen in sports across my lifetime, where kids even as young as elementary school get coaches in sports. So it's kind of interesting to think about too, would it happen and what would drive it? Would it be societal shifts and change that would allow for that? Or would, having mixed gender teams and competition help also contribute to societal changes with regard to how people view gender? And I think there'd be a lot of backlash regardless. Because often it has to do with gender and gender equality too.
I think to backpack off of that with I'm trying to think of an example outside of sport where gender has a huge emphasis. I'm lucky enough to help out with a menstrual equity advocacy group on campus. And I think menstruation is a huge topic that people don't approach from a gender inclusive lens, because it's this notion that not all women who menstruate, I think I messed that up. Not all people who menstruate are women, and not all women menstruate. There, I said it correctly. I'm so sorry. But it's just the idea that it's, again, such a binary concept that people can't fathom that anyone other than a cisgender woman can menstruate. And then it's just like, how do you build around that with bathrooms and inclusive like education, essentially. And so I think it's, again, like changes, it's going to take a while, but looking at it beyond just one topic or the other, it's intersectional with so many different other things in life. But yeah, that was just another example for people to think about as well.
I have an opinion, I guess, on your question, Tanya, about where maybe it will start. The change might start in athletics, and I see that happening personally in college athletics first, just because you have young adults who are willing to speak up for themselves. Before coming to Linfield, I've been here 11 years. I was an office manager for high school for 10 years, and parents have much more power. They have a lot more power. And Kenna, you were mentioning the generational difference, and it's so true. And so at the high school level, you just have a lot more involvement from parents and more traditional, I guess, ideas. And so I think the changes you guys your generation is doing fantastic things, and I think pushing forward, and that's where it's going to happen.
This just reminded me of that. So in my swimming experience, I don't know if anyone, no, wait, I know Kristen was a swimmer. That's right, we're fellow swimmers. So in swimming in America, growing up in an age group swimming, you would go to a swim meet and you would, every single race, so I swam 100 breaststroke, so 100 breaststroke would be divided by like, I think it was 10 and under, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 to 18, and then men's and women's. And so you can imagine how freaking long a swim meet took. And, you know, parents are there all weekend long, just knitting or bored, whatever, watching these swim meets. And then for a while in high school, I lived in Australia, and I was really surprised to find that the way they ran meets, it was not gender specific. It had nothing to do with age either. So you just put in your time, you entered your time in when you signed up for a meet, and then you're on the blocks next to whoever is in that same time frame. So and the meet was done in 2.5 hours. It was amazing because, and it wasn't a collegiate meet. It wasn't for ranking within a conference. So that would be the difference. But as far as running an efficient meet where people get to race and get to qualify for other meets or get times, it was totally efficient. Yeah, it was a good experience. Funny element of it too is, this should tell you a little bit about being an American too. In America, we would always fudge our times. We'd always put a slower time because you never want to be shown up, right? You never want to swim your race and be like, oh man, I totally, you want to beat people, right? So you'd fudge your time by a couple seconds. And I did that when I was in Australia. I put a slightly slower time than I was capable of. I was 18 and I was on the blocks with like 12 and 13-year-old boys and girls. And the rest of my teammates who were my age were totally making fun of me. They're like, ah! Look at you put in a slow time and now you're racing little kids. It's like, oh, great. But it was a very humbling experience. That part was humbling, but then just in general, the concept of just remove the categories and race for racing was a really, really fun way to do it. So.
You know, one thing if I could share, you know, with some sports, you know, in high school, football, wrestling, and judo in Hawaii. And then I coached football, wrestling. So in Hawaii growing up, you know, there wasn't women's wrestling, girls wrestling. And same with judo, there wasn't a girls, you know, organized sport, you know. So, you know, with the Title IX is developing more women's sports and programs. And so when we were in high school, the girls will compete with the boys. We practiced all together. And then when they had tournaments or matches and there was exhibition, we would match up by ability, you know, level of your degree of where you're at, of course, by the weight classes as well. So they would compete. And so that was my experience in high school. And then I have a friend of mine who's the head wrestling coach in Hawaii at Lahaina Luna. And years ago, and I don't know if Hawaii is the only state that has their own state championship for the girls. So he's won state championships with the girls team as well as with the boys teams. So, you know, we were together when we were growing up, you know, men and the women, the boys and girls, and then they separated into girls having their own state championship. You know, I just think like, is that an advantage, you know? But then when you come back to people who have, you know, are transgender, is how do we fit that all in? You know, is it better all together, which I see advantages to, or is it better for the separation where we've gone into the separation by some individual sports? You know, that's just challenging a way to think about.
Yeah, Doug, to kind of go off your point, that's something that I know that a lot of people are concerned about is like, will cisgender women then have a chance to be highlighted if they're then competing against like these really good men? Like, it's definitely a fear, and I understand that. And I've just been trying to figure out like, how do we like go about that? And Jane, I'm so glad you shared that, because I've never really thought about dividing people by ability. And I know it can be difficult to measure in some sports, but I relate to Joey in that I did track and cross country, and things can be really divided by time. I've actually done a lot of races where you were divided by like, okay, like top 2 varsity on your team, and then like number 3 and 4, you guys go against each other. Or like, if you've hit a certain time, then you're allowed to go to a meet. And so I've never thought about it until you said that, Jane. And so I kind of want to bring it back to you, Joey, because I know that you obviously have that experience as a track and cross country athlete. So when you thought about having everybody compete against each other, have you thought about ways to make it more, you know, fair, so everybody has like a chance to shine? And like, what do you, and also, like I said, it might be a little bit easier to quantify that with track and cross country and, you know, track in general, just because we do have actual numbers. But what about sports like that do have statistics, but it could depend on like your day, you know, like basketball and football, like those all vary. So what do you think about that?
I actually, like I said, I finished one of my classes today, and it was sports ethics. So we talked a lot about this. And I think that like exactly what Jane said, like we can compete by times in so many sports, like in swimming and track and cross country, that just by putting your times out there, that's how you can compete against people who are in your equal like category of competition. When it comes to other sports, like such as like men's and women's soccer, you got like the exact same game. And you know, some people go like, oh, like the men play more violent, but the women play more skillful. And so by combining them, you know, you're gonna mix both those kind of cultures and create a sport that is different than what you have right now, but is maybe the best of the game. And that, like, you know, what do you want from sports? Do you want people to win, or do you want to see like who is the best athlete? And by, you know, getting rid of those gender lines, like we can see who is the best athlete overall. And exactly, like some women are going to kick some men, you know, they're going to be a lot better than other people. So it doesn't really make sense to have them so divided in the first place, because you can have greater competition by combining. And also we create a space for our non-binary participants as well. You know, a place where people, you know, regardless of their gender identity, feel like they can compete. So, yeah.
Thanks for the people that are presenting today. It's been an awesome conversation. I stuck a book title in the chat with some of the things that are being discussed about different ways of organizing sport besides gender. The book is an amazing read, and I think I almost took more pages of notes off of the book than actually were in the book, because it talks about a number of different ways of organizing sport outside of gender and what the challenges would be, and then also what the potential benefits would be, and kind of expands a lot on some of the things that have been brought up today. So if anybody's really getting intrigued by this topic, I highly recommend the book. It was an amazing read, and really makes some thought-provoking commentary on looking at sport in a different way. And I just the other point that I wanted to bring up is, Tanya, when you were talking about the barriers about trying to be more non-binary in sport, I think sport is such a microcosm of society, and that whole binary view of individuals is societally created. And we see it in not just in sport, but across society in general. And I think if we try and break down the gendering of sport, I think we also have the opportunity to break down some of the stereotypical power structures that are based on gender outside of sport as well. And where does it happen first? Does it happen from sport up, or does it start from society down? I'm not sure, but I think having these types of conversations just enables people to think about, well, how can I make a difference in the position that I'm in right now? And that might start the grassroots rolling.
That actually reminded me, like, on the topic of non-binary athletes, there is a non-binary athlete, they identify as trans and non-binary. Their name is Laisha Clarendon, and they play on the New York Liberty in the WNBA. And they, throughout their professional career, they've accepted the use of all pronouns. And so they were comfortable initially with sportscasters and teammates and different people in their environment using she, her pronouns, just because that was something that most people could understand at the time. But more recently came out as trans and non-binary. And I think a lot of it too starts with education and starts with the higher ups in whatever organization completely buying into it, because once they made this announcement and surrounding their identity, the actual sportscasters that were calling their games used they, them pronouns whenever referring to Laisha. And it's something as simple as that, and affirming their identity can mean so much. But also, would this type of situation happen in the NBA? I don't know if they have that culture to have a non-binary athlete exist in that league quite yet. But with the WNBA, they've been so progressive and at the forefront of so many different issues that they created this culture that Laisha felt comfortable enough to fully own who they were. And so I think it's a combination of so many different things, but a lot of it was due to the leadership of the WNBA. So I was reminded of it because I almost wore that jacket, Natalie, so.
Yeah, I think pro sports is that's the last frontier, honestly, because it's so hard to, they can't even have actively gay out athletes in most professional sports. So it's so hard, but I love what the WNBA has done for so many things. And Joey, I appreciate so much you sharing your experience, because I know before this, my familiarity with the topic was kind of the scandalous side, where it's like the men who are transitioning to women and how that is kind of gets blown over. But I think, or gets blown up because, people think that they're just trying to compete to win. And I think that overlooks the idea of what it's all about is your identity and being true to that. And how sports is just another expression of that. So I really, and Kenna too, you're amazing. You know that. You rocked it. You educate me every day. So, and everyone for joining too. Other questions?
I wanted to just chime in, Joey, too, as you were talking about the support that you, what was supportive and sharing your tips with us. It really came across too, just how composed and really in tune with who you are is so evident. So but I mean that in a way of like, regardless of whether or not you had transitioned, there's something about your outlook on life that is so that's optimistic and expects the best out of people and gets the best out of people, because I have a feeling if I spent a lot of time around you, you'd be given the best as well. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that because, as you said, it's really challenging and takes a lot of courage for an athlete to come to a person they look up to and say, hey, I'm transitioning and I'm transgender and this is what I want to do. I want to still be called this and I want to race with this team. And for a coach to listen and be present for that is really important. But I'm curious about, for you, looking over the span of your upbringing, your parents, your support around you, has there been anything that's really been grounding? Like, what would you say is the most grounding thing for you? What keeps your head and your heart in the, connected in this whole experience?
I think a lot of it comes from, I don't know, I am a very go with the flow type of person. It's just been that way since I was born. Just like how I came out of the womb. Yeah, I think for me, it's like, nobody knows me better than me. And so if I want change done or if I want something to happen, then I'm gonna have to speak up and make it happen, because nobody can just read my mind and make that happen for me. So I think that's important. And also understanding that, like, a lot of times the misconceptions or the negative attitudes people have towards trans people is because they've never met a trans person before. They haven't ever had a conversation with someone who is trans. So they have this idea that the media, like, oh, they're all trans people are, predators, all trans people are cheaters, stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, because that's because you've never met a trans person. Like, these are just things that you've been told. And so, like, when people, I think, meet trans people, they're like, oh, like, you're just like a normal human being. It's like, yeah, like, trans people aren't evil people who are like, criminals or anything like that. It's like, no, like, I'm a normal human being. I'm go to college. I'm an athlete. Things that connect me to you. And I think that's like kind of one of the things that like is so beautiful about like humanity, is like that we're all interconnected. Like, we all have things that we share in our lives. And I think that sometimes that's the best way to connect to people. It's like, oh, like, especially with athletics, like, we all have one thing that really bonds us together. It's like our love for the sport. And it's like, I have a love for the sport and I have a love for myself. And that means I'm going to transition and continue to compete, because that is, what I want to do, but also is like, it's how I'm showing love for the sport and love for myself, is by transitioning and competing in the sport that I want to compete in. And I think, what was good is, we live in such a liberal place. I go to such a liberal school that there wasn't really an issue when I came out to, like the first time when I first joined the team, it was like, I used he, him pronouns. I came out to my friends and I was like, hey, like, can you model this for me? Like, make sure that you use he, him pronouns for me. And I'll try to tell people that I meet as well. But like, by you being my friends and like doing that for me, that sets up such an example that it creates almost like a societal pressure for others to also use the same pronouns. And that's why it's also so important for like coaches to use correct name and pronouns. Like, you are the role model. And by using that, it encourages everybody else to use the name and pronouns that the student wants. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing everything you did, your perspective, your thoughts, your tips, your experiences. And Kenna and Zack, thank you so much too. Kenna, thanks for the presentation. Zack, thanks for being here and always for your support and being willing to share, to answer any questions. Any other questions that this group has?
I just also want to say that you guys are awesome and thank you so much. And I just want to give a special shout out to Zack for always helping coordinate so many things. They've been amazing this year and we've worked together multiple times, and it's just really cool to see events like this happen. So I just want to say a special thank you to you, but also a special thank you to Joey and Kenna for joining us today. really means a lot. And I love these conversations. I love learning from you guys. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I could see this going on to a couple of different ways of continuing the conversation. So I'm excited for more talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come and speak. It's been really, like, it's such an awesome opportunity, and hopefully, you know, we'll have something similar at Pacific, because this has just been so positive. That's been really awesome. So thank you for creating such a positive environment, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Joe, I noticed you got purple in the background. I love those purple coats you got there. Sorry, I couldn't help but say that, but anyway, appreciate all of you.
Joey, all the best to you in your season too, whatever it brings.
Thank you.
And if you guys get something going like this at Pacific, let us know. We'll be there too. Thank you everyone for being here, for being part of the conversation. And Joey, you're always welcome in WildX. Anytime you want to come back, bring your friends. Part of our Fridays, we'd love it. All right. Thanks all.
Yes. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Again. Bye.